What's happening on this Sunday afternoon? Welcome to the Red and Bold Show, where we break news or we respond to breaking news. I am one of your hosts, Marc Adams. You can find me at 49ers Camelot, wherever you watch or listen. You can find my co host, Anthony Robertson, at 49ers Cutback, wherever you watch or listen. Ant, how's it going?
It's going good, and we are on the eve of craziness, but I feel like craziness has already started because there are all kinds of players being released around the league. We're seeing signings. We're seeing Myles Garrett get just an absolutely monster deal. He did not want to go from Cleveland to Canton. Well, guess what? That's exactly what he's going to do now with this contract signing. So it is just the tip of the iceberg. This is going to be one of the most unbelievable free agency periods, I think. And you know what? I'm ready for it. And the question is, are the 49ers going to be really entertaining a lot of these free agents? I would say maybe moves suggest one way or the other. And I think this is going to be a fun episode to kind of go over that.
It is going to be interesting to see if they are ready, how they'll proceed with this, because by a few accounts, a few reports, namely Mike Silver and Tim Kawakami, it sounds like there's some restructuring going on. Based on what they're saying, it sounds like Kyle Shanahan's decision making regarding player signings and things like that might be taken away. Now, I will say that I think that this is risky, mainly because I think that it potentially hurts the relationship between the head coach and the front office. And I say that because back in the 80s, Eddie DeBartolo did the same thing with Bill Walsh. And I know that their relationship was interesting at times. When I did the Roger Craig story for 49ers Web Zone, and then when I did the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig, the podcast series, and I interviewed a lot of people. And when I had Carmen Policy on, after we finished the recording part and we were no longer, out where people could see, I asked him, something like, I've heard that there were a handful of times where you had to talk Eddie DeBartolo out of firing Bill Walsh. And he goes, no, it was a lot more than a handful of times. He fired him many times and I had to talk him out of it, or John McVay had to talk him out of it. And so I do think that when they removed Walsh's personnel responsibilities, I don't know that he liked that. And Walsh he put a lot of pressure on himself. He was a perfectionist, and I think that he retired too soon. But I just think that the stress was so much. And I think that some of it had to do with his relationship with Eddie DeBartolo. So that history makes me a little concerned. If this is true and they're taking away some personnel responsibility from Kyle Shanahan, could this have an impact on the relationship that Kyle has with the front office? So I want to ask you about this because I actually think that it's a good move to take some of the personnel decisions away from Kyle. I think that he's a little too emotional at times because he cares so much about his players. I mean, all we have to do is look back in August, I think it was, that when they were about to trade Brandon Ayuk and Kyle ran up the stairs and stopped him because he had Ayuk ready to sign. And so I'm not saying that was a bad decision. I'm just saying that he likes his players a lot. He loves his players. And sometimes that love of a player, that love of a person can blind you to making the decisions that are right. And so I kind of like the decision. I think it's risky. If this is true and they're taking away some of the personnel responsibility, I just want to know what you think. Do you agree that it's a good move, or do you think, no, he needs to, he'll still have his say, but maybe not quite the clout or the influence that he does now?
Yeah, I think it all depends on how this thing is actually laid out, and how exactly they're determining who has the final say. If it's just as simple as, look, we're still going to collaborate as we've always done. John is still going to lead the charge like he's always done with, the scouts and everybody else and the player personnel people and finding out who these players are. And the coaches are still going to give their influence on who they prefer. And then you go out and you get the players that make sense for the system. If it comes down to now that Kyle Shanahan just doesn't have the ultimate final say that John Lynch does, I do think that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan's relationship is good enough that this isn't going to be a problem, because John is going to lean into what Kyle wants anyways. These two just are on the same page. So I don't know how significant this is. I do think that they're probably recalibrating the way they're doing a lot of things. And I think this is just what they do all the time. If you go back and you watch the 2017 draft, they took Reuben Foster. He had character concerns. They don't do that anymore. In 2020, they took Javon Kinlaw, and he had an injury concern, and they don't do that anymore. And I think that they continue to recalibrate the way they do things. But I don't think the contracts, even though some of them ultimately didn't turn out the way the 49ers wanted, were unwarranted. Kyle Shanahan getting involved in getting Raheem Mostert a little bit more money going into the 2020 season makes a lot of sense. Raheem Mostert was a very good player. And, yes, injury definitely hurt them. But you look at Debo, he was coming off a 2021 season where he was all world, over 1,700 yards on offense. Everything about that warranted a new contract. You look at Javon Hargrave, he was coming off a double-digit sack season. Everything warranted a contract. So I think if they recalibrate, I'm okay with it. I do think that this is always a touchy situation because they hired Kyle with the certain type of mentality, just like they did with Bill Walsh. The buck stops with the head coach in that situation when they have personnel decision-making available. Now, if you recalibrate it, it can be touchy, but I do believe that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan can work through this with the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl. And I think that's what Kyle's, kind of method is to his madness. That's what he wants. And if he thinks that this is going to help, he'll definitely do that.
Yeah, I guess I just wish that we had more information, and they'll probably never give us this until this regime is gone. But whose decision was it to draft Trey Lance? Whose decision was it to move on from Trey Lance? You remember in the 2017 draft, who was the running back that they took in like the 4th round? Joe
Williams.
Yeah, where he wasn't even on their draft board, and Kyle one night's just watching film of him and fell in love with him, and they drafted him, and it was a big mistake. Now, 4th round mistake is not as big as a 1st round mistake, but it just makes you wonder who makes some of the decisions. Like I really want to know some of the like the 5th round picks, that they've hit on. Who's that? Like that person needs to be making decisions on 1st round picks. And maybe it's the same guys. I don't really know who the one is that's hit on those. Ultimately, it's Lynch and Shanahan making the decision. But is there somebody that just has a really good eye, and is there somebody that has a really bad eye? So those are the things that I worry about. The dynamics are really interesting. When I talked with Carmen Policy, I asked him a question. I've never written on this. In fact, I don't know that I've told anybody this in a public setting like this. But I had heard years before, I heard this rumor that Bill Walsh in the 80s wanted to trade Joe Montana for John Elway. Do you remember? Have you ever heard that rumor?
From you, yeah. Me and you have talked about this off screen, yeah.
Okay, so I asked Carmen Policy, was that real? And he said yes, after they won the 1984 Super Bowl. So this would have been Montana's 2nd Super Bowl win, Walsh's 2nd Super Bowl win. And I know that Walsh was really enamored with John Elway, because at one point back in the 80s, I heard him say, if John Elway was in the West Coast offense, he'd be the greatest quarterback of all time. And so I asked Carmen, I heard this rumor, was it true? And Carmen Policy said yes, Bill Walsh wanted to trade Joe Montana for John Elway, and Eddie DeBartolo said absolutely not. And so I'm glad that it didn't happen, but it shows that I mean, maybe Walsh would have got his hands on Elway and they would have won more Super Bowls than Montana won. He won 2 more. Maybe Elway would have won 4 more. I don't know, but it just shows you that you have an owner saying, "No way, we're not getting rid of our star quarterback," and a coach saying, "Hey, I think we can do better." Those dynamics are the kind that we rarely hear about. And so that's why this situation, these reports, or maybe they're more rumors than reports, they just intrigue me because it tells me something's going on behind the scenes that potentially Kyle doesn't like.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I don't know how much credence to put into any of this stuff. I do know that, the guys who are talking about it are usually really reputable. So I do, listen to it and take it into account. But with the way that the 49ers normally handle situations behind closed doors, you just don't know what is leaking out that's real and what's not. Like you said, this could be a rumor, this could be fact. We don't know for sure. We may never know for sure. But I will say that I don't think it's wrong to recalibrate, to look and possibly look and go maybe in a redirect a little bit. It might not change a lot of what they do, but maybe just a focus of how they handle things. And it could be really simple and it could be more complicated. But yeah, I think when coaches are involved in decision making, it can be really good, right? Bill Parcells once said he wanted to buy the groceries. You know what I mean? And I think that is a good statement, is that as long as coaches are involved in that, it's going to be fine. If they eliminate the coach from having a say in which players they take, then you're going to get a Trent Baalke, Jim Harbaugh situation where Baalke's drafting players that don't fit what Jim Harbaugh wants, and then you start falling out of love with what's going on here. So as long as they don't lose that, it's going to be fine. And I do think it's going to be fine because John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan are on the same page. They like to build a team the same way. And so I think overall it's going to work out. And I wonder how much Jed's going to be involved. We're going to find out. A lot of people say they're not going to spend money in free agency. I don't know if that's going to be true, but I think we're going to find out real quick if the 49ers are willing to be players in free agency. And there's nothing about me that believes that Jed York is going to pull a complete 180 from his Uncle Eddie and decide all of a sudden, like, oh, no, we're just about making money. We're not about putting a good football team out there that can win a championship.
Yeah, he wants to win. He wants to have Super Bowl trophies of his own inside that building. So yeah, I completely agree. I think he's always going to do what he has to do. David in the chat says any team that goes 6-10 should be having these conversations. Yeah, I would agree with that. And Kali says Kyle had too much on his plate. And that very well could be, it could be that that they're just trying to make things a little bit where he just focuses on coaching. Well, let's get to some of those moves because the 49ers reportedly made a move today. They reportedly are close to possibly making another move. And that is with Joey Bosa. Many are predicting that the 49ers are going to sign Joey Bosa. Tim Kawakami says that he's hearing it's headed that way, that they're actually working on this. The question is, should they do this? On the upside, Bosa would be a great compliment to his brother, Nick, but he's often injured. Somebody said to him, I don't know if it was Kawakami or somebody else, but somebody said that they're hearing that the 49ers will keep Leonard Floyd, bring in Joey Bosa, and have a really nice rotation there on the edges. So what do you think that they should do? Should they bring in Joey Bosa if the price is right?
Yeah, I did a video a little while back, maybe like a couple weeks ago, about building the 49ers. And one of the things I brought up with all the conversations about edge rush is the affordability of Joey Bosa is what made him appealing to the 49ers. Because you do have to somewhat reconstruct your defense, and you don't have money to pay a big-time defensive end per se. But if you can find someone who has the potential to be a big-time defensive end, we've seen it in doses, maybe you could hit it just right and get the player that you're looking for. But I think there's also the push for him to play with his brother. So financially, you might be able to get him a lot cheaper. You're not giving up any draft capital. And so if you happen to hit and he stays healthy, he's a double-digit sack guy potentially. And I get it. He hasn't had a double-digit sack season since 2021. Completely understand that. But you've got a potential here to bring in a player on the cheap that doesn't cost you any draft capital. You can continue to get younger building through the draft, but you get a guy in Joey Bosa that's good against setting the edge in the run and still has the upside to be able to get to rush the passer. And I will say this, you ever want to see a Nick Bosa motivated? You ever want to see a Joey Bosa motivated? Let them play together. I think they'll feed off each other. They have similar energy. I think it could be a really nice pickup. So this is one I actually thought was going to happen at least a couple weeks ago, and now it looks like it's moving in that direction. Nothing's ever for sure, but I do think that this makes the most sense for the 49ers.
Yeah, I agree. Let's get to that super chat there from Bro Montana, who's passing along $2 to you. 49ers revitalized injured CMC's career. Bosa could. So, yeah, I mean, that's very possible. There's no guarantees that he's going to be great, and there's no guarantees that he's going to be injury riddled with the 49ers like he has. I like that. I like your thinking on that coming in and playing with his brother, the two playing together, they may feed off each other to the point that we see the best out of both of them. I don't know. So it is something to watch. It's going to be interesting to see what they do there. Also, Kawakami, in addition to predicting a Bosa signing, he's also predicting that Brandon Ayuk will not be traded. He's predicting that the 49ers will sign Tyler Lockett and Drew Dahlman. We've talked about Drew Dahlman. We both would love to see this happen. So my question for you is, should they sign Tyler Lockett, and will they sign Dahlman?
I think that it's interesting with Tyler Lockett. That's one that I'm kind of surprised that's tied to the 49ers. I love Lockett being able to get open, but when you think about 49ers offense, you think about run after the catch. That's not something Lockett does. Lockett is a catch and drop type guy, and he's not one of those guys that likes to take hits over the middle. So I love, how good he is running routes and being able to get open. I'm just concerned about him really, not getting the extra yards. I don't know if that really fits what the 49ers do in their offense. But we'll see about that. And when it comes to, the center, and you're looking at Drew Dahlman, there's a lot of teams that are going to go in on Drew Dahlman. And I've been saying that I thought this money was going to be more expensive than probably a lot of people think. Maybe the 49ers are prepared to go in on getting Drew Dahlman. I don't know. But I think this one's going to be a little bit tougher. I think there's going to be a bidding war because you're not used to seeing a 26-year-old interior offensive lineman who's a top 5 at his position available on the open market. So I think there's going to be a lot of teams. I think the Bears have a lot of money to spend. They're going to be prepared to go all in as they have completely been restructuring that entire offensive line for Caleb. And so I think that they could go that direction again. So let's see. When Dahlman's money starts hitting $15, $16, $17 million per year, will the 49ers stay in on it? I think that's a question mark especially because a lot of people don't think the 49ers want to spend money. And now potentially they need to get at least one defensive tackle on the open market. They could be signing Joey Bosa. They got to address cornerback potentially and safety. There's a lot of money to go around. I wonder if they can sign the number 1 interior offensive lineman. I think it could get too rich, but I would love it. I mean, I would really love for Drew Dahlman to be a 49ers player next year.
Yeah, same here. One defensive tackle that's been rumored to be on the 49ers radar is Jonathan Allen. We know that in the Deebo Samuel trade with Washington, that Jonathan Allen was at first included in that deal, and then for whatever reason ended up not being included. What do you think about him, and could the 49ers afford him?
Well, I think they could now. I mean, the news coming out is that the 49ers are moving on from Malik Collins. And if they're moving on from Malik Collins, that means you've got a lot of work to do in the interior defensive line. I think most people thought already that defensive tackle was a position of weakness. But Malik Collins was at least a steady starter. Now, there is no steady starter. The guys on roster are Jordan Elliott, Kalia Davis, and Evan Anderson. You have a lot to do there at defensive line. I think it's a foregone conclusion. They get at least one defensive tackle in free agency, and I think a foregone conclusion they get at least 2 defensive tackles in the draft. So the 49ers are kind of betting on that, and I do think Jonathan Allen makes a ton of sense for the 49ers. I don't think they wanted to pay him $16.5 million. I'm sure they want to structure that contract a certain way. Doesn't mean he wouldn't end up getting 16.5 per season. But being able to structure it where you can backload it, I think, is something that makes sense for them. But you're talking about a guy that brings pressure from the inside and stays primarily healthy. I know he only played 8 games this year, but when you look at the previous 4 years, it's like 16, 15, 16, 15. He plays a lot of football games. He's consistent. He's a pass rusher. He plays well against the run. To me, he's a dynamite selection for the 49ers in free agency and probably somebody they're going to target. So, yeah, I would love to get Jonathan Allen. And I think with Malik Collins, it kind of makes sense now.
Yeah, that's a great segue because I was going to ask about Malik Collins. The reports are that he's being released by the 49ers, but Matt Mayoko says it's not official and that the 49ers may continue to try and get something for him in a trade. Does this move make sense to you? I mean, they already needed help on the defensive line, and now they're trading or going to be getting rid, either trading or releasing Malik Collins. Is this a sign that they're wanting to really upgrade their run defense?
Yeah, I think it shows that they're trying to upgrade the position. And, Malik Collins got 5 sacks last year, and I think that was a pretty good number. But I think there was too many times where he got moved out of his spot when it came to stopping the run. And the 49ers were trying to go with a more interior pass rush, with Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins. They tried to do that the year before with Eric Armstead and Hargrave. And it worked because you had Armstead who could really stop the run. But I thought that last year Malik Collins didn't live up to it consistently. I do think he's a solid player. But you're talking about a guy a little bit older, a guy that's, still making a lot of money. And this might be the time to shed some money there and go for a bigger name or a couple bigger guys. And if you could go ahead and add a couple of guys to your defensive line and change it up, get better against the run, but still be as effective as rushing the passer, I think that's what they're really looking to do. And so I think that's why they're moving on from Malik Collins, potentially. And like you said, they could trade him. And I just don't know what you're going to get. Last year, they traded a 7th-round pick to get Malik Collins. What's a market like for Malik Collins, especially if everyone just waits, lets you cut him, and then they could sign him for cheap on the open market?
Yeah. Albert Breer tweeted today, with Ronnie Stanley, the free agent left tackle market is headed by Pittsburgh's Dan Moore and Minnesota's Cam Robinson, both of whom could command close to $15 million per year. San Francisco's Jaylon Moore is probably next after those two. That surprised me that Jaylon Moore is being considered one of the top tackles available in free agency. So my question for you is, does this mean that the market is that thin at offensive tackle, or is Jaylon Moore just better than what a lot of fans have figured? Because he's been a backup. And so if the 49ers, because it sounds from other reports that the 49ers are in on potentially signing Jaylon Moore. So what do you make of that? Do you think that they see him as a starting tackle? I mean, if he's he played well when he was in for Trent Williams. Is he a starting left tackle or right tackle? Could this mean that Trent Williams changed his mind, that he's not going to play? I mean, I don't think so. I think that he's on for this year. But what do you think that this all means? Is Jaylon Moore that good?
I think they're going to keep, kind of marking where he's at. I think they would love to keep him because he does give them the possibility that if something happened to Colt McKivitz or something happened to Trent Williams, he could step in and start. And I think last year he did such a good job in that time that Trent Williams was out that he got a lot of people's attention around the league. And this has been one of the question marks that I think, I brought up earlier in the offseason was, is there a team around the league that sees Jaylon Moore as an upgrade, as a starting offensive tackle for them? And I think there probably could be. This is not exactly a position that has a lot of really good players. When you look around the league, there's not a lot of great offensive tackles. And so finding a guy that could play consistently at left tackle, especially in this scheme, with so many teams going to this scheme, he may be a guy that some teams will be willing to overpay for. And so if it gets into that category, I don't think the 49ers will save him and be able to keep him. I think they'll have to address it a different way. which might mean they go offensive tackle in round 1. You could easily get an offensive tackle in round 1 that you could put into that swing tackle role that could step in case there's an injury, and go that direction. I mean, you'd probably like to get a lot more from your first round pick, but I don't think you can afford to pay Jaylon Moore $15 million. I think if this thing stays under 10, you've got an opportunity, but you can't really pay a guy that you don't expect to play 17 games over double digits to play on your offensive line. So he might get priced out. There's a good chance Jaylon Moore goes somewhere else and starts for another football team. I mean, Kansas City needs an offensive lineman. There's lots of other teams that could use a Jaylon Moore in an upgrade.
This week, the 49ers claimed off of waivers former Rams cornerback Trey Tomlinson. Do you know anything about him? Does he have a chance to make this team? Is he somebody that could come in and make a difference for the 49ers?
Well, he's a guy out of TCU. So we know that John Lynch has that connection with TCU. I'm sure they watched him a lot, considering that's where D. Winters played as well. So familiarity there. He played for the Rams, so they got to see him a couple times a year. Now, last year he had 0 snaps. So this is not a guy that produced on the field last year. But when you're looking for a guy that could translate to playing nickel, why not give him a try, right? You get him basically for really cheap. He's got 2 years left on his rookie contract. That's affordable. Kind of the same thing they did last year with running back Israel Abanikanda. You pick him up, you stash them. Now they come in, they fill out your depth. And if you can develop something out of them, but he was productive when he was at TCU. I mean, he's a guy who had 3 interceptions. He runs a 4.4, so he's definitely fast enough to play corner. I think the concerns have got to be his height. You know, he's 5'9", 5'8", depending on what convenience store he's walking out of. And so I think that's something to remember, is that this is probably a guy that translates better to playing inside in the nickel. But we know the 49ers needed young and cheap cornerbacks, and this is one way to get one. So I like the move. The fact he's been in the league for a couple of years, he can help on special teams. I'm not expecting him to become a starter, but I do think that he has upside, that he could step into that sort of role. So I like the move. I don't think it costs you anything, and we'll see what happens. But at least they've got another cornerback, because they desperately needed more corners because that room was barren and thin.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. But he is a little small, so we'll see what happens there. Brad Graham. He's got a big following on social media, on YouTube, does a lot of stuff with the 49ers. About an hour ago, he tweeted 49ers rebuilding the trenches this offseason. Somebody asked him, have you heard any good news coming? And he said, Brad quote tweeted this about 48 minutes ago. I've heard some good news, but I believe it's dependent on people's perception of this player. That's all that he wrote. Do you want to take any guesses as to what that might mean?
I would like to think it's Joey Bosa, because that's the one that's been so, up in the air. And I think it's been kind of back and forth. If you look at like my comment section, when I talk about Joey Bosa, there's people that are for it, and there are people that are way against it.
Yeah.
And so I think that could be a person that makes a lot of sense when you're talking perception, because signing him, there's going to be people that are going to be excited. There's going to be people that are going to absolutely not like this move. They don't like his age. They don't like his production. They don't like his injury history. All those things are completely valid. But when you're looking for bargain basement players, and you're looking for guys who have upside but need to be a little bit cheaper, that's kind of who you go for. And like you said, if they could keep Leonard Floyd and keep that nice rotation going on the edge, and you have a 4-man rotation, with some really key players, you could really focus hyperly on defensive tackle in the draft and maybe a little bit in free agency. You could turn this front around really quick. So I get it. Maybe that's who he's talking about. I don't know. We've seen Brad be right before. There was one time, I can't remember which player it was. He hit on it. He said, hey, yeah, they came in for a workout. They're going to be signing. And even John Lynch was like, I don't know who this Brad Graham guy is, because we hadn't even decided yet when he said they were going to get signed. But Brad's a great guy. I've been able to kind of hang out with him and sit with him at training camp sometimes. He's a good guy. And so if he's hearing something, he might be. He's tied in sometimes to some players. So we'll see what happens.
Strawberry Reacts said, apparently it's on the offensive side, not defense.
Ooh, interesting.
And that was my first thought too, that maybe it's an offensive lineman because Brad is really into the offensive line. So maybe he's heard something there, but it's hard to say. Steve-O said Trey's coming back. So maybe that's what it is. Let's see. I want to ask you about Dre Greenlaw because it sounds like the 49ers are in on trying to bring Greenlaw back, but there are some who believe that they're going to lose Greenlaw. What do you think that their plan is to replace him? Is it a free agent pickup? Is it D Winners? Is it a draft pick? I just saw something. Let's see. Matt Mayoko is saying that he expects the 49ers to be players in free agency to some degree and believes linebacker Jamian Sherwood is the backup plan if the team is unable to sign Dre Greenlaw. So what do you think they might do if Greenlaw signs somewhere else?
Yeah, I think Sherwood's probably the most realistic because he played for Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh has helped develop this guy, so he has an understanding of who he could be. I think Sherwood's going to be a little bit cheaper than Dre Greenlaw, but not a lot cheaper. But he's got the athleticism to be able to run sideline to sideline. He's good in coverage. He's a guy that definitely fits what the 49ers want, the mentality and playing strong that way. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. I do think that if Dre Greenlaw moves on, if I'm the 49ers, I'm addressing linebacker in the draft, and I'm probably addressing it early. I'm one of the few people that are a huge fan of Jihad Campbell, and I think if Dre Greenlaw moved on, I would not be opposed to the 49ers picking him at 11. I'm probably one of the few people that are going to say that, but I do think he's that good of a linebacker. But there's other guys throughout this draft as well that they could potentially get. You know, you talk about a Tyrese Knight, Chris Paul Jr., you got lots of guys like that down the line, a Jeffrey Bosa out of Oregon. So it's not a deep linebacker draft, but there are a few guys here and there that you could hit throughout this draft that could step in. Now, I would say if you don't get Sherwood, you don't get Dre Greenlaw. There's only one linebacker in this draft that could start day one at that will linebacker position, and that is Jihad Campbell. Besides that, it will be D Winter's show and whoever they draft and step into that Sam linebacker role. So there are going to be decisions to be made, but yeah, I hope they sign Dre Greenlaw. I think I saw somewhere where people were saying that, Dre Greenlaw could potentially get a 3-year deal for $25.5 million. That was kind of the deal he was looking for. I don't know why the 49ers wouldn't agree to that. 3 years at $25.5 million to me, I'm running that in. They had already offered him, according to reports, $10 million as far as a contract for one season. I mean, let's just get this thing done. Dre Greenlaw is a guy. I know he's missed a lot of games, but man, he makes this defense better.
Back to that Brad Graham post where he said, I've heard some good news, but I believe it's dependent on people's perception of this player. Someone asked what side of the ball, and Brad responded with a pick of Kyle Shanahan, which makes it sound like it's the offensive side of the ball. So it's going to be interesting. This is a fun time of the year when you're trying to figure out what the team is going to do. And they always do. It seems like they always do the opposite of what we think they're going to do. Let's see. I thought I saw a question in here that I wanted to get to. Yeah, I'll look here in a second. I did think of something else, and totally that Brad Graham post just distracted me enough. Oh yeah, I know what it was. With the news that Malik Collins is on his way out, what do you think that all but guarantees that pick 11 is going to be a defensive tackle?
No, I don't. I think it's going to be dependent on what happens in free agency. Because, like Matt Mayoko a week ago was saying he didn't expect the 49ers to be very involved in free agency. Now here we are, and he says he expects the 49ers to be involved in free agency. And I think that's kind of one of the things is everyone's trying to figure out what they're going to do. There's all the talk about cash. There's all the talk about, Jed York potentially pulling back the reins. But it doesn't seem like the 49ers are not going to be involved. And so it wouldn't shock me for them to change defensive tackle and sign 2 guys and completely change what happens on the interior. It wouldn't shock me at all. And that would kind of change what happens with pick 11. I do think that there's a lot of defensive tackle in this draft that you can get through all the rounds that are potential starters. So far, I would say I probably have, I haven't went through all of them yet, but I would have probably like 20 starting grades on most of these guys right now, which means you can get guys rounds 1, 2, and 3 that can start for your football team. There are some really good ones at the beginning of the draft. You're talking, if we all hope Mason Graham slips because that's the one that everyone wants. But you look at Derek Harmon from Oregon. He's another guy, big, physical, fast. This dude's worthy of a first-round pick. He's phenomenal. Everyone's talked about Walter Nolan. There's Tyleek Williams out of Ohio State. He's another freak athlete. These guys are so talented and so big and strong that, yeah, you could see them in Chris Kacerik's defensive line and the aggressiveness that they'd be able to play. So I think the one thing I am convinced, they're going to draft 2 defensive tackles. I'm not so sure that it starts with 11.
Interesting. I am going to stand by that they're going to take somebody at 11 along the defensive tackle and for the defensive tackle position. But like you, I mean, they could go edge. They could do all kinds of things there. Freddie McDre, this is the question that I had seen. What about trading back into the top 20, then taking Jihad?
Yeah, I think a trade back scenario makes a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. I think that 11, probably besides Mason Graham, is a little too high for the defensive tackles that are available. I think most of those guys are going to kind of go on year 20. Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon, those guys right there. So trading back puts you in a better position for them. It also puts you in a great position for a guy like Jihad Campbell, a guy like Nick Emenwari, the safety out of South Carolina, who all are big-time fits for the 49ers. So trade back scenario sounds great. The question is, are you going to get another team that wants to jump up? Are the Pittsburgh Steelers going to fall in love with Jackson Dart? Are the Arizona Cardinals going to want to go up and get an offensive tackle or a defensive lineman that's going to change their football team so that way you can trade back? So it takes 2 to tango, and we'll see what happens. But I don't think a trade back is a bad idea for the 49ers. They have multiple needs that need to be filled with younger players. Walking away with this draft with 12, 13 players instead of 11 is not a bad scenario for this football team because of depth reasons. And look at last year. All but one of the 49ers draft picks were on the football team to start the season. So it just proves that they do have room for these guys and these guys can help. And I do think that, trading back is a good philosophy. If you can pick up another 3rd-round pick, maybe you can make something happen with it.
Yeah, they had a great draft last year. They need another great draft this season. I don't have anything else to ask you. Do you have anything you want to talk about before we take off?
Yeah, I would like to ask you about something. I don't know what you've heard about the 49ers situation when it comes to the finances, but I want to know from you how active you think they're going to be in free agency, because right now, like I said, the reports are all over the place, but we are getting close to things starting to really take off. And I think that we've all kind of felt kind of up and down about this. And I want to know what your feelings are about the 49ers free agency. Are they going to go out there and be big spenders, or is it going to be very selective on who they get?
I think they're going to be active, but I think they're going to be selective. I don't really expect a Javon Hargrave type deal. I just think that they seem to be the fact that we talked about this last week, the fact that when John Lynch spoke in Indy, that he said the word cash more than he said the word cap. And so it just makes me think that they're trying to get rid of some of these larger contracts more so than freeing up cap space. I mean, they were willing to take on Debo's entire dead cap hit this year instead of spreading it out. Now, is that because they wanted to get the draft pick? I don't know. But I just think that I think they're in a position. It's curious. I mean, the fact that the Yorks are trying to trade a small portion of the team away. I don't really understand what's going on, but I don't think that it's anything to get worked up about. They have a lot of really, really smart business people in that building. So I think they're going to be fine. I don't think that they're hurting and that they're going to stop buying, and stop spending. I mean, you mentioned it earlier that Jed York really wants to win. He's a little bit like his uncle that way, that he's very, very competitive. He hates losing. So I don't think that they're going to start selling so much that they go back to being this terrible team. But yeah, I would expect them to be active. I just don't know that they're going to be active that first week. They'll be rumored in every single player out there. It will seem, because that's just how it is. I think they call about just about everybody. So I think that we're going to hear them a lot tied to various players, but I think they're going to be pretty selective in who they get. I don't think that they're going to go for the big contracts. Now, the Brock Purdy thing, that's going to be interesting. There are some people that I've heard who think that maybe they've soured on making him the franchise guy. I don't think that that's the case. I just think that they're negotiating. But I think that let's say the number's 50 a year. There was the rumor that that they lowballed him at 45, and then who was it? Somebody came out
Diana
today.
Rossini.
Yeah, she came out, I think today, and said that that's not true. That was not the case. So I don't know where they're at in this, because I was thinking, okay, if they came in at 45, his camp comes in at 65, then maybe they meet at 55. To me, I'd like to see him closer to 50, but that's just me. I'm not saying he's not worth more. I'm just trying to think of, the cap and getting the rest of the, building a team around him. I do think that they're going to make him their guy. I don't know what the cost will be, but if let's say it's 55, I don't think he's going to be paid 55 this year. I think that they'll work it out to where it's going to be a softer hit this year, just like they've done with so many of the other contracts. I mean, they did it with Ayuk and Bosa and some of those others. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see what they do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is we know that the salary cap is going to jump. Salary. They cut those too, but we know it's going to jump next year, huge, because the restrictions from COVID are going to come off. The 49ers, a lot of people are looking at their current cap situation and saying they can't be big players. Mm-hmm. But just like you brought up, if you structure the contracts so that way the big money hits in other seasons, you could be very active this season and kind of just push it down the line. The question is going to be, how much of the cash can you spend, right? How much salary bonuses can you give, signing bonuses? What can you do as far as dead years and void years? I think those are some of the big questions that I have. But, you hear about the names that are potential targets for the 49ers, and they're all big purchase items. You're talking Drew Dahlman, you're talking Jonathan Allen, you're talking Joey Bosa, Devontae Adams. Like every single time you hear a name, it's always these big purchase items. And I wonder who the bargain bin guys are going to be. Who are going to be the guys that they sneak in that are really good players that you're like, wow, that was a good signing. So it's interesting. If you had to guess what position, and this will be the last one, what position do you think they would target the most? Is it going to be wide receiver? Is it going to be defensive tackle? Or do we think it's going to be offensive line in free agency?
My guess is going to be defensive tackle. That I just think that they have a strong need there. They have to get better at stopping the run. That's one of the biggest things, that when this defense was great, they not only pressured the quarterback a lot, but you couldn't run on them. And last year they couldn't stop the run. So that is a big, big issue. That's to me, that's why they probably are moving on from Malik Collins, because that wasn't his strength. And so I think that they want to get a lot stronger there. I saw somebody, and I don't remember who it was, or I'd say it, but they said earlier that they wanted Drew Dahlman, but they thought that he's probably going to be too rich for the 49ers. And so they named another center, and I don't remember who it was.
Ryan Kelly?
Yeah. Maybe that. Where's he from?
The Colts.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember if that's who it was or not. Um, I think that's the kind of thing that they're going to do. So we all would love Drew Dahlman, but like you said earlier, he's probably going to be too expensive. I just want him to move on from Jake Brendel. And I nothing personal against him, but he's just not good enough, I don't think. And so I'd say defensive tackle. I don't know. It's hard to say because they need help at offensive line, but they just seem to. It's like they don't want to do that. I don't know why they don't address offensive line more. When Harbaugh was here, that's where they built that team. Great defense and a strong offensive line. Of course, back then we were all saying that the receivers were terrible, and and complaining about Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick throws these 90-mile-an-hour fastballs when the receiver's 5 yards in front of him. And so you can't spend everywhere. And so they've chosen to go with playmakers over offensive linemen. But I really would like to see them do something on both. But I think it was, I want to say John Chapman and Larry Krueger did a mock draft. I think that's who it was. And they only took offensive linemen and defensive linemen, I think. And I actually walked away from that going, that would be a great draft. So I hope that it's something like that. But I think those are the areas that they're going to target.
Yeah, I think I think you hit it. They're going to try to find places that they can bargain basement, and then they're going to try to find some places where they hit it. And I don't know what the market value is going to be for a lot of these guys, but I do know that some of the markets are starting to get saturated. When you look at the edge rush department, you got guys like Von Miller being added to it and Zadarius Smith. So there's so many guys out there that maybe the price comes down a little bit. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing in this new salary cap age is teams are so willing to shred and shed money and then go ahead and sign free agency where they're hoping they're going to get a little bit better deal. But I think teams like Philadelphia and some others that have proven that you can go through the draft and really replenish yourself is kind of making teams think that. And I think positions like defensive tackle and possibly running back and tight end maybe aren't as big a market in free agency because of the fact that there's so many good players in the draft. Maybe that kind of drives the price down for certain positions, and then you can actually hit them in free agency. So it's going to be interesting. I think the 49ers are it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope that Brad Graham is right and we have something surprising that kind of catches us off guard because those are the type of things I live for. I remember, being asleep and they signed Javon Hargrave and being woke up to my phone going nuts because it's like, wow, I didn't even know we were in the Javon Hargrave, category. Like those type of moves are so much fun, and that's what makes free agency a blast.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago that during the season that my cousin texted me and said, man, y'all traded for a great player. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was the Christian McCaffrey trade, but I had fallen asleep or something and I didn't even know about it. And I woke up to him telling me about it. So I was like, well, and my cousin's a Cowboys fan. So, so the Cowboys fan is telling me who we've traded for. That's why I don't work for the 49ers. I'm asleep half the time. Hey, that's all we have today. Was that a question that you wanted to get to?
It was David. I was just going to tell David, from what I see from Spotrac, they're saying he's going to make about $18 million per year. So that would be the 49ers going big for defensive tackle. Milton Williams is fun, 24 years old, young guy. But I don't know if they're going to be willing to go big money for a defensive tackle. They weren't willing to trade for Jonathan Allen at 16.5. So he might be too priced out for the 49ers. Maybe they're looking kind of they did with Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos, pair two guys up that would come to $20 million rather than spending on one guy. So just wanted to get to that really quick because David's one of the best. And so I wanted to get to it before we log out.
Here's a quick question from Keys. Niners should be able to re-sign Hargrave or Allen by cutting Collins. Which player would you choose?
Give me Jonathan Allen. And, he's a guy that's been staying healthy, a little bit younger and better against the run than Javon Hargrave, but still has, the upside to be able to rush the passer. I think I would go that direction now. I always liked Hargrave, but I think he really struggled against the run over the last 2 years with the 49ers, and I'd like to see an improvement. I think Jonathan Allen would be an improvement there.
Yeah, completely agree. That's all we have for today. Please make sure to like and subscribe to both channels. That helps us out a lot. We would really appreciate it. As long as we're both alive, we'll be back next Sunday to do this again. We're trying to figure this new schedule out, but I think next Sunday should be fine for me, as long as it's fine for Ant. So either way, we'll see you. Hopefully there'll be some 49ers moves to talk about at that time. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.